Just like with Conquest, now that Birthright characters are out of the way, it's time to tackle the levels or chapters in Birthright, only this time things are going to work slightly different. Now I made separate videos for the best and worst Conquest chapters, since I had a lot to say about each of those chapters due to Conquest having very strong level design even in some of the worst chapters in the game. Birthright is a different story however, since the level design of Birthright is overall good, but not outstanding or anything special. In fact, it's rather by the numbers, and because of this I really couldn't think of 10 chapters I really liked or 10 chapters I really hated. At the end of the day I could only think of 5 chapters I really liked and 5 I really didn't, so I thought what the hell. It may not have turned out the way I'd hoped, but I felt a list counting down the 5 best and worst chapters in Birthright would be the best way to go about this, because I didn't want to spend most of the time going on about how okay a good chunk of the chapters are. Sorry if this may seem like a cop-out, but the last thing I want to do is give you a video that's half-assed and forced that drags out this marathon for all the wrong reasons. Besides, it means now I can get round to more videos quicker. Just a few things to clear up before we get started. 1. This is just my opinion, and I'm simply ranking these chapters on how much I enjoyed them or didn't enjoy them, so don't be surprised if a chapter you either love or hate is or isn't on this list. 2. I'm not including the first 6 chapters of the game since they're part of every single pathway. 3. In terms of difficulty, just like with Conquest, I played and will play every pathway of Fates on Hard Mode Classic. And finally, I'm not going to include the parallel chapters since they're going to get their own list at some point. And of course there's going to be spoilers for Birthright. And with all that cleared up, it's time to march forward and tackle the best and worst chapters that Birthright had to offer, starting with the best. It's a shame we couldn't have separate lists for this, but hey, that's what happens when most of the chapters are just so meh. You knew this was coming the moment you sided with Hoshido. This encounter was inevitable and it was something that had been built up throughout the entire game, and as much as you feared, dreaded and resented this battle, it was something you had to go for at the end of the day, and there is nothing worse than fighting the man who raised you and made you who you are, the man who loved you all your life and the man who shall be the one to end your life, and that man is the Crown Prince Xander. I got you, didn't I? I bet you were all thinking chapter 27 Garen would be number 5 on this list because of how I built up this chapter. Well, if you were paying attention, it should be rather obvious that Garen wasn't the person I was describing. I mean, I did say the man who loved you, and love isn't exactly a word that I would associate with Garen. Anyway, starting off the best list, we have chapter 26, Xander, a chapter that on its own is rather good and gets the job done, but much like chapter 25 of Birthright, it's the emotional weight of this chapter which lands it on this list, because once again it proves that Fire Emblem Fates should be called Fire Emblem Feels. In chapter 26, Corrin is almost at the point where he will face Garen and end the war, but before that, Corrin must defeat Xander first, and Xander isn't fucking around, as the in-game cutscene shows Xander proceeding to beat the ever-loving shit out of Corrin, much to my appreciation. However, Corrin knows this battle must be won and gets back up to finish the fight. Similar to chapter 25 of Conquest, Corrin and Xander are stuck in a single room to fight it out, with your teammates gathered around the outside to deal with the enemies. Now this mission can be over very quickly or take a long time depending on how you want to play, since the objective is to beat Xander, which can be done in the first turn since he's really rather easy and won't actively attack you unless you play on lunatic mode. Or you can deal with the enemies around the outside of the map first before fighting Xander. I like how this chapter caters to players who want to get through the game quickly, or those who like to take their time and gather up as much experience points as possible. Aside from Xander, the chapter does offer a decent challenge with some rather high level units and potent classes to fight against, and while not too spectacular gameplay wise, it's still a fun chapter at the end of the day. The only thing that really lets this chapter down is that Xander is pretty damn easy, since Corrin is rather overpowered in Birthright, so the fight against him is rather anticlimactic. But like I said before, it's the emotional weight of this chapter that makes it something special, since this fight has been built up since the moment you sided with Hoshido, and even after you've won, the victory is bittersweet as you watch Xander die right in front of you, fighting for a king he believed in who has long been lost, fighting in the hopes that one day he would go back to the way he once was. The events that unfold in this chapter are what make it stand out, as they are some of the most emotional moments in Fate and the Fire Emblem series as a whole, and it's for these reasons that it lands at number 5 on this list, along with being a rather fun chapter to tackle for players of all different playstyles. Now it's time for number 4, and this chapter... excuse me, you missed out on the biggest plot point of this chapter. What are you talking about? I didn't miss out on anything. Yes you did. You forgot to mention what happens to Elise. What do you mean? Nothing happens to Elise? No, nothing at all. What do you mean nothing happens? Because Xander, Elise gets... No, nothing happened. Elise is still alive and well and smiling and... Oh, sorry, I had a bit of an emotional breakdown there. Man, can we please go back to an earlier point in the game that isn't so tear-jerking? Ah, much better. Chapter 16, a chapter where I get to beat the shit out of Iago. Now that's something that will certainly lift my spirits. Not to mention, this chapter was pretty fun, and... Flora, is that you? Shouldn't you be back at the Ice Village and... Wait a minute. Oh god, the feels are coming back. No! Damn it, Fate, stop doing this to me! I mean, I'm supposed to be talking about the best chapters in Birthright, not crying my eyes out over every single character death. Anime already does that enough for me and then some. Regardless, coming in at number 4 we have chapter 16, Pleasure Capital. Another chapter that, while not too spectacular, is loads of fun to tackle and a strong level design and overall structure. In chapter 16, Corin and the gang have made it to Nohr, only Takumi suddenly falls victim to an otherwise fatal disease, because god damn it, Fates can't stop but give Takumi the short end of the stick. The gang makes their way to an abandoned palace to find medicine, where they run into Flora, who offers to help, but then suddenly Iago shows up, big shock, and tries to take you down. The objective of this chapter is to defeat Iago, and the layout of this map feels very maze-like, almost like a labyrinth in its design, as you have to make your way through a lot of passages in order to reach the exit. But along the way there are various openings and doors that lead to things like treasure or more enemies. The chapter isn't too challenging, but there are a wide variety of enemies in this map, so be sure to bring a varied team of units to tackle them. There are also outlaws in this chapter that attempt to steal treasure located at the very end of the map. If you're fast enough, you can beat them to it and claim the rewards, but be sure not to be too reckless or you might just get killed. Like I said regarding Conquest, I love this type of level design that rewards top-notch playing skills but doesn't punish newbies too much. While rather conventional, chapter 16 is still a very fun chapter that is great to tackle and can be very rewarding for top-notch players. While not the most difficult chapter, it can catch you off guard if you're not too careful, and the chapter encourages you to use a varied team of units rather than relying on one unit alone, unless it's Ryoma because he can pretty much steamroll Birthright. Oh, and if you're wondering, no, nothing happens to Flora on this chapter, so I'm not purposely missing out crucial information. The next chapter is a completely different story, but I'd rather not talk about it. Okay, hopefully I can get through this next segment without crying my eyes out. So anyway, what's next on the countdown? Ah, chapter 24, that was the chapter where we battled Hans. Man, that was a great chapter and so much fun to fight this bastard. I mean, after what he did to Gunther, he had it coming. But thankfully he didn't take anyone else's life and... Lilith? Lilith? Damn it, not again with the feels! Oh, my heart is in so much pain right now. Damn it, Fates, do you enjoy watching me suffer? Actually, that's a strong possibility considering the shit you pulled with Conquest Endgame, but still, this is too much for me. Yes, coming in at number 3 we have chapter 24, Tears of a Dragon, which as the name suggests, is one of the more emotional chapters in Fates due to the death of a certain dragon friend who sacrifices her life to save your sorry ass. Man, what is it with Fire Emblem and killing off dragon girls? In chapter 24, Corin and the gang have made their way up the secret passage leading into the castle of Nohr. As soon as they arrive, however, they run into Hans and his own personal army. Corin engages Hans, but before Hans can finish off Corin, Lilith jumps in to save the day at the cost of her own life, which is rather sad, but hey, at least she died at the hands of an actual character rather than a generic faceless. In this chapter, the objective is to defeat Hans by breaking through the forces surrounding him and teaching him a lesson once and for all. Now this map is a mission that requires a good amount of offense and a lot of defense, since there are many units and classes in this chapter, along with them being rather high leveled and respawning rather often, but not too much. Now what I like about this chapter is that it's one of the few Birthright chapters that is legitimately challenging, since Birthright is one of the easiest Fire Emblem games I've played. Not quite the easiest, that's still Sacred Stones, but this is no Conquest or Radiant Dawn. I mean hell, Path of Radiance was harder than this. Having a proper challenging chapter, and towards the end of the game no less, was much needed, and this chapter certainly delivered, since you have to make sure that you've got the right units to deal with the many classes in this map, as well as adapting to the respawning units and never getting too cocky or ahead of yourself. While this chapter is challenging, it's not the least bit cheap, unfair or even frustrating, since if you take things slowly and be mindful of the surrounding enemies, you should be just fine. In the end, chapter 24 was a chapter that tugged at your heartstrings and made your hands sweat, being an emotionally and mentally challenging chapter that while some people complain the difficulty spike and rather unfair, I welcome it and find it to be a well-balanced challenge, not something cheap or unfair. The only thing unfair is that Lilith had to die. Why Fates? She was such a sweet and lovely dragon girl. Okay, I've got to erase these painful memories. Leo, help me, damn it. Ah, that feels so much better. Oh hey Leo, what are you doing here? Why does he always do that every time I see him? You know, sometimes it's not easy. I mean, whether you choose Conquest or Birthright, things are going to be hard for you. I mean, you've got to fight against either family you choose not to side with, and that's never an easy feat. So fighting against Nohr was especially bad for me, since I liked them more than Hoshido. And do you know what the hardest part was? Having to fight my Conquest wife. Oh boy, now I've gone and done it. I mean, Camila wasn't happy about me marrying Kagero, and she made that apparent in the last list, and now I've got to fight against her. I hope Camila doesn't file for divorce anytime soon or become an emotional train wreck. God knows Camila can be dangerous when her family life is threatened, and if that happens, not even Ryoma can stand up to her. So anyway, coming in at number 3 we have chapter 23, Camila, a chapter that is one of the most unique in terms of level design regarding Fates as a whole, as well as being not the most emotional or challenging chapter in Birthright, but rather high up there all things considered. In chapter 23, Elise is escorting Corin and the group through the secret underground passage in order for them to infiltrate the castle. However, before they can make it to the exit, Camila appears after being informed by Elise's retainers, and is once again overjoyed to see Corin, but not too pleased about the Hoshidians and won't listen to reason this time. So you know what that means? Time to cut off some heads. Chapter 23 is split up into 4 sections that are mostly long vertical segments of the battlefield. The objective of this chapter is to reach Camila and defeat her along with all the other enemies, which seems simple enough at first, but Camila has a few tricks hidden in her bra. I mean, she can fit a map in there, who knows what else is in there. The main gimmick of this chapter is that at the beginning of the enemy's turn, Camila will activate the Dragon Vein and use it on whichever section of the map has the most units in it, dealing a fixed 10 damage to all of them, as well as destroying all previous blockades, allowing both you and the enemies to move further along the map. This is where the map's challenge comes in, since 10 damage can be lethal unless you have a unit who can definitely, not maybe, tank and counter the enemies, and the destroyed blockades will often allow enemies to attack units who you thought were once safe. Not to mention the enemies will often respawn in this map. Because of this, you have to think very far ahead and be 100% sure about which units will be moving forward and who will be holding back. Rushing in blind will get you killed, and not paying attention to your surroundings will be your biggest mistake. And while this may sound daunting, it's not that bad since it teaches you patience and observation, as well as making sure you use the right units at the right time or else. And if you keep all of that in mind, this chapter is loads of fun and very unique in its own right. Fighting against Nohr wasn't easy for me, and having to fight against Camila was probably the hardest part. Probably. But putting that aside, this chapter was one of the most unique and original chapters in Birthright, as well as offering up a different type of challenge factor to help the chapter stand out, as well as being a really fun and awesome chapter at the end of the day. Now I feel bad about fighting Camila, so I'm going to go see her. Hey honey, how are you doing?
I love you so much, darling. Don't you ever leave me.
Don't worry, I'll never leave your side, even for Hoshido.
Just tell me who I need to kill to make you happy, sweetie.
Camila, you might want to bring it down a notch. So we've reached the number 1 spot, and now it's time to reveal what my favourite chapter in Birthright is. And for once this chapter isn't emotionally scarring. Oh thank God, I didn't think I could take much more of this. Not only that, but this chapter is also so unique and awesome that I had to put it at the top of this list with just how much fun I had playing through it. As for once, I wasn't having waterfalls coming out of my eyes, but rather burning falls. Oh yeah, this is what I'm talking about. Birthright, you may not be as good as Conquest in terms of overall level design, but when you deliver, damn do you deliver, and chapter 21 was easily the best chapter in the game. While this may raise some eyebrows since it doesn't have a huge bearing on the plot or much emotional weight to it, this chapter is just so damn cool and unique I couldn't help but put it at number 1. In Chapter 21, Corrin and the gang are making their way to Garen's castle, but they receive a message saying Hoshido is in dire trouble as Nohr's army is getting bigger and the message is weeks old. With no time to spare, Corrin decides they must take the quickest route to Nohr, and this is going through the Demon's Fall, which leads the group into a volcano-like area they must fight through in order to make it to the castle. Not exactly the safest way to get to Nohr, but what did you expect from a place called Demon's Fall? The objective of this chapter is to defeat the boss, but the main challenge comes from making your way to the boss and dealing with the enemies and the environment. The main gimmick of this chapter is that there are large pillars spread out throughout the map, with 2 dragon veins on each, that can either cause the floors to turn into lava and cause units to spawn near you, or act as makeshift bridges depending on which of the dragon veins you activate. Now if you pay attention, the correct dragon vein is parallel to the white eye of the statue, but even if you get it wrong, it's not that big of a problem since the enemies aren't too difficult to deal with, and they only last 3 turns, so you're not punished too much for getting it wrong. Along with the dragon veins, you can also use your flying units to transport other units across the map, or just deal with the enemies by themselves. And because of how open and spacious the map is, there are many ways you can tackle this chapter. Just be sure to have the right units engage the enemy, since a lot of the same classes are bunched together. And regardless of how you play Fire Emblem, you should be able to tackle this challenge without too much hassle. Again, I love this type of level design, since advanced players can use their fire to keep the momentum going, as well as get the dragon veins on their first try, but new players aren't punished too harshly for getting the veins wrong. And it's for these reasons I've mentioned that Chapter 21 is my favourite chapter in Fire Emblem Fates Birthright. And now, let's move on to the worst. It only seems fitting that we start off the worst list by beginning with the very next chapter that comes after what I consider to be the best chapter in the game. It's funny how things work out sometimes, since the location of the worst chapter in Birthright is in the hidden capital. Kinda sucks that between the 2 best chapters in Birthright is the unfortunate middle child that gets neglected. Perhaps chapter 22 should hang out with Leo and Takumi sometime. I reckon they'd have a lot to talk about. Anyway, starting off the worst list, we have chapter 22, The Hidden Capital. A chapter that isn't guilty of being too annoying or gimmicky, but rather too forgettable and easy, even for a game like Birthright, which is really something considering most of the chapters in Birthright are very middle of the road. In chapter 22, the group make their way into the heart of Nohr, and soon after they get there, they are ambushed by a bunch of bandits, one of which being Shura, who was responsible for kidnapping Azura. Man, what a coincidence. The objective of this chapter is to rout the enemy, or in this case, lack of enemies, since this is one of the smallest maps in Birthright and probably the entire game for that matter, and the number of enemies are very small as well, not to mention rather easy. Now the chapter does try to shake things up by having fire orbs and ballistas present, but the entire thing is rather trivial since they rarely hit you or do significant damage. Not helping this is that the enemy variety in this map is severely lacking. Most of the enemies are warriors, berserkers and archers, along with maids and dark mages, so you can pretty much win this chapter with any decent number of sword users, which takes away from the whole strategy element when only 4 or 5 units are needed for this map? Sometimes it's hard to live up to the expectations of what precedes you, or stand up to what follows you. I mean, look at Devil May Cry 2, that game sucks compared to both 1 and 3. And well, chapter 22 sucks compared to chapter 21 and 23. While not awful, the chapter is just so trivial and easy it's over before you know it, and it feels like a complete waste of time. So let us not waste any more time on this chapter. One thing I really don't like in Fire Emblem games is when certain chapters consist of fighting almost nothing but the same units and classes. Honestly, it really annoys me when Fire Emblem games do this, since once you know which unit can counter one of the enemy classes, you've pretty much won the entire chapter, which is why Endgame 4 of Radiant Dawn and Chapter 21 of Conquest suck. Now to be fair, there aren't that many of these chapters in Fire Emblem, and some of them like the Lagoons only chapters can still be a good time, but more often than not, when they appear I don't look forward to facing them, which is exactly how I felt in regards to Chapter 11. Takumi, Setsuna, Reina, you're all going to have to work overtime, as this chapter is one you lot can just decimate. We'll just sit back and do nothing because who gives a shit about strategy and planning? The fuck do you think this is, a Fire Emblem game? Yes people, coming in at number 4 we have Chapter 11, To the Sea, a chapter that is guilty of the trope where the entire map is filled with the same types of units, making it one of the easiest maps in the game to the point in which it just becomes disgusting in just how easy it is to beat this chapter with no more than 3, maybe 4 units? Yeah, tactical RPG my ass. In Chapter 11, Corin and the gang are on the hunt for Ryoma, and they be sailing the 7 seas in search of buried treasure hidden deep within Davy Jones' locker. Okay, in actuality, they're making their way towards Nestra, but along the way their ship is attacked by those ghost-like enemies that keep appearing throughout Birthright and Conquest, and you must fight them off. The objective of this chapter is to rout the enemy, and you'll immediately notice as soon as you start this chapter that the enemy is made up of all flying units, Pegasus Knights, Wyvern Riders, you name it, and they are placed around the outskirts of the map. If you figured out the best way to go about this map, well done, and now you know that this map takes no effort whatsoever. If you haven't figured it out, well, let me clue you in. Flying units are weak to archers, but archers can't shoot at point blank range, so all you do is get a unit to stand at the very edge of the enemy's attack range and have an archer support attack with them. Boom! You've won. All you have to do is rinse and repeat this throughout the entire chapter and you win. So Takumi, Setsuna and Reina are going to be doing all the work since they can one-shot all the units. Honestly, while the idea of steamrolling the enemy sounds fun, it's not fun if it's the same enemy over and over again. I mean, there aren't even any ground units on the boat to fight, just flyers, and with no less than 3 archers at your disposal, this chapter just falls to pieces like a stack of dominoes. But wait, I hear you cry. Path of Radiance did the same thing with Chapter 12. What about that chapter? Well, Path of Radiance gets a free pass since Rolf and Soren are the only units who have a major advantage against the Lagoos, and even then Rolf is more than likely underleveled at this point. Plus the Lagoos are very tough enemies and don't die in one hit. Having the same units and classes take up an entire chapter is something I don't like in Fire Emblem, and Fates proves this once again with Chapter 11 of Birthright, a chapter that suffers greatly from this trope and becomes one of the most one-sided and repetitive chapters in the game. If only Chapter 11 followed my time-honoured philosophy, variety is the spice of life. Birthright and Conquest are meant to be polar opposites in many aspects, and I find the quality of the same numbered chapters to be one of them. Why, you ask? Well, do you remember Chapter 8 of Conquest? Yeah, it was awesome, wasn't it? I love that chapter. Well, I had the opposite response to Chapter 8 of Birthright, because that chapter was dull as shit. It's actually rather funny now that I think about it. Chapter 8 of Conquest was great, but Birthright was boring. Chapter 21 of Birthright was awesome, but Conquest sucked. And Camilla's chapter was great, but Hinoka's chapter sucked. Wow, these two games really are polar opposites. Well, sadly, Birthright gets the short end of the stick this time, since Chapter 8 was one of the dullest chapters I've ever played in Birthright, which isn't exactly a good sign considering it's the second chapter in the game. Well, second proper chapter in the game. In Chapter 8, Corin is on the hunt for Ryoma, and making his way through the internal stairway, but soon runs into what appeared to be Faceless. After fighting them off, it turns out they were Wind Tribe members, and Corin goes to the tribe to try and explain things to them. However, actions speak louder than words, and thus Corin must prove himself to Chief Fuga that he isn't violent by doing what else? Being violent and fighting the Wind Tribe. Well, of course. The objective of this chapter is to defeat the boss, which is simple enough, but getting to him is the part that takes the most effort since this is a desert map, which to be honest isn't much of a problem considering a good chunk of units aren't affected by the terrain, and the dragon veins can turn parts of the sand into normal land. But the entire process of fighting enemies and beating the boss is boring. I mean, this chapter isn't challenging, and because of the chapter's somewhat sluggish pace, it can become rather mundane very quickly. I guess I can't be too hard on it since it's only the second chapter of the game, but being this bored early on really isn't a good sign. At the very least, I will say that you get Hinoka and her retainers Azuma and Setsuna in this chapter, which is good as I like Hinoka, and Setsuna always makes me smile. It's one thing to be a bad chapter that is either poorly designed or frustrating. It's another thing to be completely boring since the purpose of the video game is to have fun, and while Chapter 8 of Birthright is certainly boring. While there's technically nothing wrong with the chapter offers next to no substance and is a rather poor way to get people excited about the adventures that come. But after all is said and done, Corin does prove himself to Fuga, because if you've got the patience to get through this Snorfest, then you really can change the world. Even some of the best Fire Emblem chapters can be rather annoying if the chapter gets dragged out for too long. Now this can be done in many ways, but most of the time it's through the use of respawning units, which to me is not a good way of extending game time. So why would you drag out an already boring chapter with a lot of respawning enemies? Can you answer me that, chapter 25? You know, as much as I hated certain chapters in Conquest for the frustration they gave me, at the very least they felt rewarding once you beat them and they never made me bored. Sadly, I can't say the same thing for Birthright since, like chapter 8, chapter 25 is a very boring chapter and is made worse by the fact that the chapter drags due to the size of the map and the amount of respawning units that appear throughout the map, especially if you go out of your way to collect everything. In chapter 25, Corrin is heading towards Garen, but now that Hans is out of the way, you must face Iago, who has been keeping track of you thanks to Takumi being possessed, which sounds bad, but it could have turned out worse. Much worse. The objective of this chapter is to defeat the boss, and you can simply run straight towards him in order to get it over and done with. However, there are treasure chests at the right and left side of the map you can go out for bonuses, which I like. Now, there are a decent amount of high level units in this chapter, which aren't too much of a hassle at first. But things start to get annoying as soon as the end of the first turn, as the enemies begin to respawn. Really, game? Really? You can't even wait a good 5 turns before the enemies respawn? What's worse is that they respawn right next to you. While in the game's defense they only spawn in certain areas of the map, but still this is kind of ridiculous, and it's not a case of them being hard, but rather the respawning units just drag out the chapter, as having to deal with and constantly stop progression, just to be sure no units get ganged up on from behind, make this already dull chapter even more dull, and if you go after the treasure, then the number of respawns just increase and holy shit does it get boring. It really sucks when a video game you're having so much fun playing suddenly gets boring. I mean, this happens in a decent number of games, even ones that are otherwise fantastic. And well, Birthright is no exception to this, because before this we had great chapters like Camila and Tears of a Dragon, and right before another great chapter, we have to slug through this shit and man does it ever put you to sleep. At this point, all I can say is that if you want to have the most possible fun with this chapter, just head straight for the boss and get it over with. But if you're like me and want to get all the treasure, be sure that you will have your patience tested as you struggle to find the will to keep on going due to the extreme levels of boredom. Anyway, let's wrap things up with the number 1 entry. Well, we've reached the number 1 spot. Now it's time to reveal what I thought was the worst chapter in Birthright. And this chapter, while not frustrating or poorly designed, suffers from many aspects I bashed the other chapters for. Fighting the exact same units, being dull and dragged out, pathetically easy and just so damn boring. Because while facing hordes of the same enemies is boring enough, nothing is more tedious than fighting hordes of faceless. Ugh. Come on, Fire Emblem, did you really have to do this? I mean, yeah, there are other chapters that are more poorly designed and frustrating compared to this one, but none of them made me want to just put down the game and walk away more than chapter 20 of Birthright just because of how boring it was. Except for perhaps Conquest Endgame and chapter 14 of Binding Blade, because holy shit, those chapters are bad. But yes, my least favourite chapter in Birthright was chapter 20, Fort Dragonfall. Another chapter that was once again not poorly designed or broken, but damn was this chapter some of the most tedious, easiest and monotonous shit I've ever played in a Fire Emblem game. In chapter 20, Corrin and the gang find themselves heading towards Fort Dragonfall, a fort built around the remains of a legendary beast, possibly a giant god dragon. That sounds strangely familiar. As the group makes their way inside, they are caught in a trap by Iago, and have to fight and take out all the faceless so Azora can open a path for them to escape. By any chance, is it a path of radiance? You're right, I'll leave now. The objective of this chapter is to defeat the bosses in the centre of the map, who you must reach by navigating through the narrow passageways that lead to it, along with some of the treasure you can obtain if you decide to go exploring. Now, the only unique thing about this chapter is the dragon veins, as they are used to stop the stomach acid from hurting your units. But even then, the damage from the stomach acid is so minimal, you can pretty much ignore it, and outside of that, this chapter is so bland you'll be begging for something fun to tackle in the next chapter. Perhaps that's why I like chapter 21 so much. I mean, the entire chapter is just fighting faceless, moving forward, finding more faceless, watching out for respawning units, finding more faceless, making sure you look out for their breaker skills, finding even more faceless, and are you bored yet? Because I certainly am. I know not every chapter in Fire Emblem can be outstanding or top of the line, but at the very least they should offer something of substance even if it ends up being bad. Chapter 20 offers nothing, and leaves you feeling completely hollow and empty on the inside while playing, much like the Dragonfall itself. And when it comes to Fire Emblem and video games in general, there is nothing worse than suffering from complete and utter boredom, which is why it takes the #1 spot of my least favourite chapter in Fire Emblem Fates Birthright. This has been CRASHX500. I wish you all a great night, take care, and even though Birthright's level design wasn't as good as Conquest, it was still overall good, and hey, some of the chapters were great, and others were unfortunately pants. Well, now that Birthright is out of the way, it's finally time to tackle the final rule of Fates and determine which characters are the best based on all three perspectives. Ryoma, it could be you. Xander, it could be you. Kaze, it could be you. Felicia, it could be you. Camila, it could be you. Takumi, it could be you. Corin, it's not going to be you. Hey everyone, thank you for watching today's video. Be sure to click that like button, and if you'd like to know when more of my videos are coming out, be sure to hit that subscribe button, and don't forget to follow me on Twitter at CRASHX500. For alternate video recommendations, I first point you to best Conquest chapters, where I look at my favourite chapters from Conquest, top 15 Fire Emblem chapters, where I talk about my favourite chapters in the Fire Emblem series as a whole, and for something completely different, I point you to the top 10 banes of my childhood, where I talk about which moments in gaming from my childhood scarred me for life. Hopefully one of those videos will be to your liking. Once again, thank you for watching, and I'll see you all next time.